So in this session, we'll talk a little bit about clinical research. And before I start, I just want to do a quick poll. How many of you heard about OMOP? Excellent, excellent. And how many of you have heard about FHIR? Wow, it's the popularity of FHIR I just can't beat in this crowd. But what's interesting is OMOP is quite popular among the researchers. And so just want to kind of recognize that. And you heard a little bit earlier today about the keynote and the interest from the customers about OMOP. So here we're going to give you some updates about OMOP here. And hopefully you also had a good nap after lunch. And so you come in here, you should be like wide awake and getting ready to learn something new. So my name is Chi. I'm one of the physicians on the product team. With me is Aya. She's a product specialist on the data platform side. So first, I want to give you some background about clinical research. So when I started this exploration, a lot of folks were wondering why research, and the commercial team is always asking, is there money in research? You know, they're like, just get right to the point, right? So what's interesting is on the research side, the government continue to fund a fair amount of research. And NIH, which is the U.S. National Institute of Health, funded about $45 billion last year. About 75 institutions on this list, each one of them received $100 million per year for clinical research. So a fair amount of money. How they spend it, of course, that's another discussion point. Now, a lot of money is also spent by the pharmaceutical companies. R&D spending was $123 billion, a fair amount of money, a lot of clinical trials. They continue to grow. We're talking about 8% and growth. And so it's what's interesting to characterize it is the trial has become more and more complex. And also what they call the trial productivity has been decreasing. But oncology trial market alone is like $20 billion. So it's a fairly huge amount of money. I called out the Mass General Hospital here just because we've been speaking to Harry, and who is their senior VP of clinical research. Recently met with Terry and talk about the research needs and from an informatics point of view. So that's another reason we do this, because some of the thought leaders and really come to us, say we need to help them. Now, another interesting thing is we're also seeing additional funding agencies in the U.S. This is one example. This is called ARPA. If you guys are familiar with DARPA, you know, we're not making military sort of defense stuff here, but this is ARPA for healthcare. So it's more of an advanced research project agency for health. And they allocate additional funding to not only support research, but more around how the research institutions and the commercial entities, pharma companies, and startup companies, or just any industry vendors can work together more effectively. So government continue to fund these initiatives. Now, we're participating in one of the consortium, and they're creating a data common, so where organization can contribute data, make it accessible, so that the researchers can use it, industry partner can use it. So we're seeing all these new funding streams. They are being created to support research. Therefore, we are increasingly seeing more money is actually going to go to research, and so therefore, some of the infrastructure using informatics will be helpful. Another thing I want to ask is about the Chief Research Informatics Officer. Anybody in the audience that have heard about this role, and you know your CRIO in your organization? No? Okay. It is relatively new. So in 2017, there's a survey for 25 Chief Research Information Officers. Most of these large organizations on the previous list, they all have this role, CRIO. And it's done by a kind of trade journal, and talks about their responsibilities, which is managing infrastructures, clinical research services, and also building bioinformatics tools. You can see there's a natural language processing, ontology, and data request services. So they're managing all the data infrastructure, tools infrastructure for research. So to me, this is the type of individual in your organization maybe you can speak to. If it's our team, you should speak to. If it's your research institutions, I'm pretty sure those individuals will be interested in what we do, what we can do for them. And of course, they want to do a lot more innovation, technology. The survey was from 2017. It's a small number. And recently, I did my LinkedIn search. I found that there are about 20,000 people with this title somehow. Maybe there's a CRIO in some other industry as well, but it's increasingly become more and more popular in many organizations. And I'm also seeing a pattern where they are consolidating tools. They see lots of departments do their own thing. Now they want to streamline it. They don't want people waste time to do manual things, do the same thing. Now, what's also useful to point out is that we have been doing these on a project basis. So it's not like we have a full product support doing the research data aspects of it. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll give you a quick update about what we plan to do. But in the past, if you were here last year, you probably have heard our team from Spain in Catalonia talk about their project with Pactoli, which is a very large teaching institution. And they build a data pipeline from FHIR in the relational data format into OMAP, and using some of the OMAP Odyssey open source tools. And it was funded by European Health Data Evidence Network. They call it EDEN. So if you're in Europe, you probably will hear about EDEN, and I'll talk a little bit more about EDEN as well, which is their regional effort to promote the sharing of the data, but with the assumption that you're all going to use a common data model, which is OMAP. And by the way, somebody else asked me to explain what OMAP is. And it's an observational medical outcome partnership. So that's what OMAP is. Sometimes I even myself forget, blanking on what is it called, but there you go. And we also had a customer, a very innovative partner called RIQI, which is in Rhode Island, their health information exchange for the state. They funded a project, which is actually through NIH funding, for their National COVID Cohort Collaborative, N3C. Basically, for all the COVID patients, you submit data. The data format is OMAP. So they use HealthShare, generate OMAP extracts. Every 6 months, they send the data to the NIH data center. So that's another project that has been done before. Now, what's in 2023 is since last Global Summit, we have been working on several projects. We'll talk about 2 projects today. And so I use the word project. And the first one is FHIR to I2B2, which is done really led by the Mass General Brigham folks. They are in support of NIH study to look at the long-term effect of COVID. They call it RECOVER. Always a catchy name by these researchers. But it's really a research to look at COVID, how to enhance recovery. And they need to collect lots of data from the patient. They're using FHIR as the source data. So we'll demonstrate how it is being done. Aya will do lots of demonstration for you. And we convert it to the I2B2 format, which is a little bit more generic version of the OMAP format. It's a kind of compatible, but it's just one of the research data model that's out there. And we also did a project at Baystate Health. Earlier this morning, you heard about Baystate. They do the patient portal, messaging tools, and they also do lots of other things with us. This is one of them, about how to create OMAP repository so that they can collaborate with 3 other local institutions in Massachusetts to do collaborations around research. So again, a common data model is a prerequisite. And by default, they chose a model that's out there, already being used by many institutions, which is OMAP. And of course, our goal is to, which is in both of these scenarios, is do something different. So people will usually ask me, say, Chi, why are you guys doing something different? People have been using I2B2, OMAP for not quite decades, because some of them is invented only about 10 years ago. And, but most of these organizations, they use lots of SQL scripts to create the OMAP repository and the transformations. And, but what we're doing is using Iris for Health, which to me, everything is a black box. So this is one of the box. It's not quite black, because inside it's Iris for Health. And with all the operations, processes, and the mapping, and so on and so forth. So it can achieve all of this data transformation and ETL process using Iris for Health. So this, to me, it's a new way of using the technology that's already mature. we take input in the first use case, fire resources is dropped in as JSON format in the inbox, and then it gets picked up and transformed to the I2B2, which subsequently can also be transformed to OMOP. Those transformations already exist. And so this type of model, it becomes much simpler because these are standard data models, fire models, and I2B2 or OMOP models, and all you need to do is do standard transformation. And so this can be more easily productized. But what's more important is that you can refresh OMOP repository on demand. As new data comes in, you can change it, you can refresh it, so it's not like a batch SQL script. And so it's a little bit easier. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into it. So a little bit about I2B2. So it was developed in 2014 at Harvard Medical School. So many years ago, the schema is a star schema. Everything is stored in the observation fact table. So you might have a patient has medications. The medication will have medication name, dose, strength, when was ordered, and so on and so forth. And all those information are stored in the observation fact table. To define what data is in observation fact is depend on the concept dimension, which will define what data actually goes in there. I always tell my team, star schema, it's not bad, it's flexible, right? Of course there are other concerns, but this is something that we could look at. Now, the important part of it, it's open source. It was funded by NIH Research, so they make this as a public asset. And a lot of these development is maintained by the Harvard Medical School folks, but they contribute to the community and make the tools available. It's very useful for sharing of the data. They have another federated sharing tool on top of it, which makes it very attractive. So for us in the MGB COVID study, the project goals is really to get the data from the fire resources to make available and to put into the I2B2 standard. And we actually engaged Clinovera, and I see Anatoly, who's the principal of Clinovera. We actually engaged Clinovera to do this project. And because this is highly specialized, we also engaged them for the OMA project as well. So there are a lot of specific things regarding processing fire resources, and also the partner that NIH selected generates these fire resources in fire bundle format. So we had to do some specific processing as well to make sure those fire resources are processed in a specific sequence. And in addition, we did reverse transformation, did a benchmarking, so I'll give you a little bit more detail on those as well. So the workflow is a high-level 3 steps. One is get the fire resources, and it could be requesting from the fire endpoint, or it could be receiving fire resources from the partner that NIH selected. They're very secretive about all these things, so I cannot tell which company, but it's not us. It's some other third-party companies. They can get these fire resources from the hospitals where the patient has given consent to grab the data. They also have patient-reported data as well, but it's all exposed in a fire format. And secondly is that the second step is to put them into a set of folders in the tables so that we can process it. And then we put them into the transformation pipeline so it can go to the I2B2 structure. And another very important, interesting thing is, actually, there's the company name right there, Care Evolution. And so that was the NIH partner. They use Care Evolution to grab all the fire data from the patient and make available. Now, for this one, we can do using the API to test the fire resources, to request patients' fire resources, but they can also send the fire data to us as a fire bundle. When we get the fire bundle data, we put them into these folder structure, and you can see just organize them by the type of resources, and just do the processing. In our demonstration, we have a simple, very similar structure as well, which basically take the fire resources and put them into these folder structure. And so that's the part. I'm going to skip this one because you're going to see more detail, the demo of that from Aya later. And so we did some benchmarking tuning as well. We used 63,000 sample patient. These are the Cynthia patients. They have a COVID. We did some benchmarking on some of the queries. The highlight is it's about 99% performance improvement. It's by issuing SQL query, and you can see the the number of seconds or a millisecond that used to take, and now it's much quicker. So we use the tune table command to tune the performance. So that was fairly efficient. Once we implement that, and performance for 63,000 patients was quite good. Previously, we've done some other testing on the 1 million patients as well, and very similar results. And so this is just to make sure that when you collect all the research patients, now you're able to run query very quickly. The I2B2 query tool is the main tool that they want to use, and that tool itself has a lot of SQL queries, very chatty. Every time you select something, it's issuing command. You select something, it's issuing command. It's not quite the same user interface that Don demonstrated earlier today. We don't quite have that yet, even though we're working towards something like that. So we have to think about the SQL query performance almost in real time. As soon as the user say diabetes, it's running some query behind it. We don't want this to be 15-second delay. That would be horrendous. So the performance is very important from a user experience point of view. So now I'm going to switch to demonstration.
Thank you, Chi. So before I go and show you the query builder, I'm just going to go through the steps of this demo so you kind of have a better understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. So we're going to open the I2B2 query builder, create a query. Notice the number of patients from that query within the interface, and open up the Iris instance, the Iris Cloud instance running in the background. And to sort of exemplify loading FHIR data, I'm going to change the FHIR path that Iris is picking up the data from. So I'm going to change the file directory and sort of run the query again, and you'll notice a change in patient numbers of that query. So just to show you how it's running in the background and that it's live, essentially. And then I'll show you the message log within the production, so you can see that it was successfully loaded and queried. And then we're going to run a test utility to sort of go, so that was FHIR to I2B2, and then we're going to do the reverse, I2B2 to FHIR. So we're going to do a patient search within the Iris test utility. So we'll take a look at what that FHIR resource will look like coming from I2B2, so on the other end of that transformation. And also search for that particular patient name so you can see a particular resource. So I'm hoping that we can come out of this. Okay, perfect. Sorry, I didn't clean up my desktop before this. So I'm going to go ahead and log into the I2B2 Query Builder. This is the landing page. You see all the terminology on, I think this is very small. Get this bigger for you. You see all the terminology on the left-hand side. So for this query, you have groups that you can add your concepts, so what you're searching for. So in this demo, I'm going to request analysis on gender. So I'm going to open up demographics, add gender, so we can see the differences in this query for male and female. And if you're looking for a particular concept, instead of looking through diagnoses and trying to find what category of diagnoses you're looking for, like an endocrine diagnosis, you can go and find the terms themselves. So for this instance, we're going to look for patients who are on metformin and have diabetes. So in my search, I'm going to search for medication and pull that into the query. And also look for anyone who has a diabetes diagnosis. And it's already sort of filtered for you by the high-level concept. So all of these diagnoses will be pulled in this way. And then we want to run this query. You can have, it can produce different result types. In this case, I'm just really interested in seeing the number of patients that are produced from this query. You can also look at the gender breakdown, which will produce a graph if you're interested in that, vital status, differences in race within the query, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to say OK. It also would take a little bit longer for the query to run, so I just really want to look at the patient number of patients here. So within our data set, there's 92 patients that fit this query. And so, like I said, we're going to go back to the Iris instance. I'm already logged in here. You see the production. You're getting the FHIR resources here. It's running through our processes, exporting into the I2B2 framework, and then you have operations here to check for duplication of data as well. So like I said, we're going to sort of exemplify bringing in new data so we can run the query again. So by doing that, I'm changing the file path here to pick up in a different directory. I'm just going to say directory 6, hit apply. And so that should pick it up immediately. And just in case, I'm going to reload and run the query again. Just what I've noticed from doing this demo. So give me one moment. And rerun this query. Does anyone remember what number was up there? 92. Okay, great. So you're paying attention. Good. Okay, so we're going to run the query, just again check for a number of patients. And if this number doesn't go up, it just means I've already tapped into that query, that directory. But you see the number did go up, so it's a whole new patient that's been added. And so this is just exemplifying, moving data from the IRIS instance from the FHIR format to I2B2. So the next piece of the demo is to do the reverse, like I said. So we're going to look into the process here, run a test execution. So within this test, we're going to look for the request for patient search. Let's see. Get the right one here. So we're exporting patient search to a FHIR request, so going from I2B2 to FHIR. And we're going to look at let's run the test service and take a look at that FHIR resource once it's been transformed and gone through the production. Just take a few moments. And then we'll see the visual trace of this. So this opens up in a new tab. Let's take a look at the message. So you see this FHIR resource, the patient resource. There'll likely be a number of patients here. But we're going to run the test service again and look for a particular patient that's found here. So if you're looking for the patient name, let's see where that is. Let me just find the family name. Nope. So we've got a patient here, last name Pennington. So I'll go ahead and copy that and run the test service one more time. Specifically looking for that patient. So you've got option here to include that particular patient. And if you view the visual trace once more and that particular message, you get just that particular patient's resource. So it's a much shorter message, and it's just pertaining to the Pennington patient. So this is just to show you the visual trace kind of going from I2B2 to FHIR and the reverse.
Great. And so it's if there's one thing I want you to remember is just because of IRIS for Health is a very powerful engine. So we're using this for the research data transformation pipeline. And if anybody asks you, okay, well, how does the InterSystem do it different? You can just say, well, now we can do incremental, right? We can take FHIR data incrementally, and everything basically, it's not like a software from scratch. It's actually using IRIS for Health. So all the capability with IRIS for Health is right there. So I'll spend some time talking about OMOP. So OMOP, interestingly, is very similar. It was created very early in 2008 and from Columbia, the other great city, not Boston, and it's in New York. The Odyssey, which is the community, was created in 2014. When it was created, there's a fairly good participation from the pharmaceutical companies with a lot more emphasis around the analytics aspects of it. So you can compare cohorts and do comparisons, and it's main gearly towards some of the research analytics that the pharma company very much is interested in, and also a lot of emphasis around the outcome. Versus I2B2 is mostly about outcome, the cohort searching aspects of it. So the focus is slightly different. What's interesting is also has been increasingly adopted by the governments and health insurers, and now there's also the real-world evidence companies, Evidations and all these companies, they're all using the OMAP format. I do have another question for the audience, and do you guys, for the folks that raise hand with OMAP, do you know anybody that actually run analytics services on OMAP? Raise your hand. Excellent. We should talk more. Yes, absolutely. Because there may be some exciting development that we're doing in this direction. Now, what's impressive about OMAP, the reason that we think that this is a very important data model for us to support, is because there's a huge ecosystem out there. There are lots of tools and work groups. They attract not just different industry sectors, but also the tools that they have developed is very rich. You talk about Atlas, which is to create a cohort, it's a Hades, it's a research analytics, and many of the research folks are used to it. And there's data quality dashboards, there's Achilles, which is the data profiling tools. I don't know why it's called Achilles, sounds bad, but there's also Athena for vocabulary management. And there's a White Rabbit, Rabbit in a Hat. I don't know why that's the name, but I'm sure there's a story. There's a Usagi, which is a data mapping for local codes. They're free text, and they can do fuzzy matching as well. Earlier I talked about Europe with the Eden effort. So Eden, interestingly, if you're a data partner, you can actually see what are the data sources that's available in OMAP format. They issue a R package to do pre-computed statistical calculation on your OMAP repositories, and then you share the summary to a central repository so that you can run this type of report. And that will help you to determine, if you're doing a certain study, what institutions and with the data that you're interested in that you can collaborate with. So it becomes a discovery tool for hospitals to collaborate, but also for the pharma company to engage. So it's a level of a data visibility that was never possible before. Even the researchers, they don't know enough about what type of data is available. So you can see that now there are, I think, 139 million patients. It's a fairly nice trend that they're doing, and I wish the US can do that as well, in other countries also. But there are a lot of challenges. What we found is that most of the tool, it is open source, which means that a lot of stuff is still manual. Earlier I talked about the batch script that you had to create to do the transformation. In addition, most of these are single EMR only, and many of them developed against Epic. Epic has the Clarity, the CDR, you can do that. But even among Epic users, they're not really comfortable sharing the scripts because other people's scripts might not work, and you had to troubleshoot 80 scripts, and just very complex. The expertise is very limited in that sense. And of course, you can hire professional companies, service companies, like Anatoly's Clinovera, but in many cases, it's a little bit difficult with the scaling part. And also, they try to adopt standards like FHIR and so on and so forth, but it's always maintained by a research group. Like Georgia Tech has a very well-known technical group that does some of the mappings. Also, in HL7, now there's a FHIR to OMAP work group. But a work group being there doesn't mean that asset, artifacts is immediately usable for your own commercial purposes. You still need a lot of tweaking and so on and so forth, keep it up to date. And data refresh is not frequent enough. Most organizations, they're doing it every several months, and at Johns Hopkins, they can do it every 2 weeks. But in general, it's not very near real time. And so for many organizations, if they want to do analytics on top of it, for example, every day, it's very difficult. So there's a general interest in, can we feed the data more quickly, more frequently, in that case. The last bullet point is actually interesting. Most hospital ITs, they focus on their EHR. So when the research team has certain needs, they're not really getting a lot of help. And they actually, sometimes they do have the funding, but the only thing they could do is hiring the people and to do the work. So sometimes I feel like it's a double-edged sword in a way that you blame them for not spending money on software, but part of it is there's no software available, so they had to spend money on the people, right? But the people is not scalable. So in a way that, can we break the pattern by bringing a very solid tool that can help that? So here's the project that we did at the Bay State, and we have a Health Insight environment. If you're not familiar with the Health Insight, it's part of HealthShare. All the data is organized in relational table structure. The data goes into the Health Insight, the environment, so it's all relational. You can query them. There's a fairly well-defined data structure, relationships. And the key thing is this is where you select a patient based on some predefined logic. And working with the Clinovera, we actually leverage a lot of their expertise in OMOP to build out a model where any table changes in Health Insight will trigger a refresh, which means that we'll look at a patient that has new data, grab all the patient about this data, transform it, and push it into OMOP in Iris. And of course, in their case, we want to push it to their Postgres environment. So we do that too. So all this process is happening at a one patient at a time, which has its advantages, which is meaning that if you only have every hospital, let's say every night or all the encounters, you're talking about, let's say, 3,000 patients. You don't need to refresh your entire 2 million patients. You can just refresh 3,000, outpatient, inpatient, and so it's a much smaller number. The sequence is also very important. OMOP has set a structure about creating tables, populating data, look at the patients and the care providers and the encounters, and all these are set a sequence. You follow the OMOP logic to create it, create those tables. And one thing that we run into at the Bay State is actually around the mapping. So a lot of time people say, why don't you just use White Rabbit? Map the table structure, you're done, right? But it's not that simple. A lot of data that's in one source table, when you map to the target, it also depends on the value in that table as well. So the mapping is fairly complex. The type of, whether it's allergy table, it could map into multiple different OMOP tables, depends on the content in that table. So there's a fair amount of logic that actually needs to go in there. So that's one thing, the first thing that we found, which is very important to have an automated routine that can do all of that. And the second part of it is that data quality is a very important issue. Now, this is an area where the data quality defined most commonly as, do you have the required field value, right? Secondly is that, do you have the appropriate code that's recognizable by the OMOP ontology? So OMOP say, these are the code values that I accept. And does the input data contains the acceptable value? If it doesn't, it's not mappable. But sometimes the alternative could be if you have another mapping table, you can do that. Or you can use some fuzzy text-based matching to match them to the OMOP ontology. So that's the data quality is another issue that we have to resolve. And so in this case, it's when we look at this, we use the same approach. And we, meaning Clinovera and us, we worked on this together at the Bay State, and to build out processes, operations, and so that the data ingestion, data transformation is using the same approach. And so this is another proof point about the different input, different output, how can we use the Iris for Health to support it. So now let's get to a little bit on the demonstration side.
Okay, so unfortunately we don't have a live demo for our OMOP environment. However, there should be one running on the Clinovera table and within their environment, so please go check them out. The demo that we would have shown, here are the steps, just so you have an understanding of kind of how this works behind the scenes. So taking the Health Insight HSA table, so data stored into the OMOP framework, so we'll show the data as itself and populate more patients, so insert data via SQL script and command. It's going to trigger automatically the transformation behind the scenes, and we would show the patient list. You'll see that it has a trace with create person tagged on there. So Atlas will have access to that transformed data, and you'll know that with that tag. So you'll have the same patient count from the HSA table, but with new IDs within Atlas. And so we're just gonna, we'll show the Atlas data sources so you can see it on the other side, and have the Atlas-based dashboards metrics populated. So because we like to do the reverse, we'll also just show with some screenshots the process behind transforming FHIR to OMOP. So this is the production that we use with the components. This is just a bird's eye view of the mapping behind the transformation. So going from FHIR to OMAP, the clinical data model fields within OMAP are mapped to specific FHIR paths, or they're extracted from the FHIR resource itself. And this is just a quick look at the DTL, or transformation, based off of that Excel mapping. So the DTL here just shows the set statements that gather those field mappings, mapping them to the FHIR path. So I'm just going to go through some specific examples of different concepts. So this is the person mapping. It's mapped from the FHIR resource to the OMAP-specific target data model fields. The same for the condition resource and medication. So also available are the lookup tables to help you kind of better understand how your data, your specific data, is mapped and transformed. So the source value of that data is mapped to that concept value within OMAP, so it's identifiable and usable by the data model. And then here's the production again. It includes processes, so you're not only ingesting and saving data during the transformation, but you're also checking on the operations side for duplicates. So it's checking the data within IRIS, so you don't have multiple patients coming up in your cohort search. And this is a message trace identifying the message path, so across the processes, and the FHIR resource comes into the interop service. The resource is saved, undergoes the transformation and ingestion process. The resource ID request there is the piece that helps you avoid duplicative data. And then looking further into that trace on the observation fact transform response, that's showing a particular resource and the values that are processed and transformed. So the content on the right-hand side are showing the values in this particular message trace. So hopefully that helps you give you a better understanding. Again, if you're looking for a more live demo, please go to the Clinovera booth.
So we're not done yet. Yeah. So you could try yourself. You go to Open Exchange, you look for I2B2, you'll find this. And it's been maintained by Clinovera, and they have been providing updates to the package. And you can try all of these yourself. You can download it. There's a Docker container. You can just install it. And there's an OMAP package as well. Now, I do have a quick announcement, which is more of a research data pipeline solution pack. And this is something that we want to package all the artifacts that we've done in the previous projects and to make this as a new offering. It was really focusing on the different input format, different output format, and looking at initially, it is FHIR as the input and OMAP as the output. And this will be quite suitable for many of the scenarios. And we think that this is a start with the common standards will be more appropriate. It will continue to do the incremental data refresh for new data or individual patients. So that seems to be a pretty good, decent logic. And so definitely feel free to talk to us about any type of your data management needs around research. If you are interested in this solution pack, and I would love to talk to you more about it. And that concludes our presentation. We have 5 minutes left, so if you want to ask questions, feel free to do so. And there's a mic in the back as well. Is this something useful in OMAP, and does it help at least explain something? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for this great presentation. How do you handle terminologies? Because in FHIR, you can have many terminologies, whatever terminology it is, and that can come from an EMR that maybe not be in SNOMED. So is it planned in your pipeline to do terminology mapping? Yeah,
so the terminology mapping, our solution pack doesn't handle this in terms of accommodate any types of code or values. In general, this is some type of a mapping that you need to do externally. And so you put that into the mapping table, which is earlier there's an Excel file that you saw with a source value, target value, and you can use whatever tools that you already have. You can use Usagi if you want to do some of the fuzzy matching. But my hope is that this is also where we're waiting on the FHIR terminology standards, which right now there isn't, right? And so in a way that we have to constrain it. And but in general, that if you use some of the standard fire, let's say standard reference terminologies in fire resources. In the out of box, there will be sufficient mapping to the OMOP ontology, which also constrained SNOMED CTs and so on and so forth. So out of box, there will be some sufficient mapping to get you started, but a lot of local codes, it's still implementation work that you have to do. You can use other tools for that. Yeah, we're not going to provide a special tool just for that. Any other questions or comments? I do want to recognize Anatoly from Clinvera. So for us, this is relatively new, and they help us quite a bit to validate all the product concepts and designs, and their team has a lot of OMOP expertise as well. And we're going to rely on them for lots of implementation as well. No questions? Okay. All right. And any questions? Feel free to reach out to me afterwards on the map, on the app as well. Thank you very much.